In this regard and over the years, several names have been mentioned by critics and fans alike, but the question remains without a single definitive answer. Today, we have come up with our list of the 10 best rock guitarists, who we believe have marked a before and after in the history of the genre. We hope you have fun along this musical journey, and that your favorite guitarist has his respective appearance. Don't forget to leave your like, your opinion in the comments box, and your subscription so you don't miss the content that we will be releasing every week. Thank you very much. Pete Townshend must be one of the most representative icons of how a guitarist should face rock. Not only for being part of one of the most important bands in the history of the genre, but also for being the forger of an absolutely integral work, musically, visually, and sonically. If we can summarize the impact of this Briton on music, we can say that it has been something simple, but at the same time, vital. Townshend messed up rock, and hit the table from another point of view, reordering the prism of how to generate sounds, and making school for many who came later. The creator of Tommy, the masterpiece of the rock opera genre, 10 years before Pink Floyd's The Wall, he also imposed a unique style of playing the guitar, almost like hitting it to make it emit sounds. The strumming he did was particularly violent at the time, something that can be appreciated in songs like Won't Get Fooled Again or The Quick One, While He Is Away. His musical career began in the 1960s, when he founded The Who together with Roger Daltrey, John Entwistle, and Keith Moon. The band gained popularity over the next 2 decades with their distinctive style, fusing rock with elements of mod and psychedelic rock. Pete not only made it fashionable to shred electric guitars in a live performance. Townshend was the inventor of this gesture of destruction, a little by accident, but without a doubt, he knew how to take advantage of it, and ended up becoming the precursor of a gesture that has become part of the history of international rock and roll. In parallel, he musically influenced guitarists like Jimmy Page. The punk movement helped define the style and music of heavy metal, and also the grunge of the 90s. Pete Townshend was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of The Who in 1990, with whom he amassed 13 recordings, sold some 100 million records worldwide, placing 17 albums in the top 10. In addition, he recorded 8 solo albums. Over the past 25 years, Pete Townshend's influence as a musician and stage persona has been enormous, and he has always been regarded as one of the key guitarists in rock music. The peculiar way of approaching the execution of his instrument, together with Knopfler's characteristic voice and the band's fibrous musical approach, turned Dire Straits into a successful group right from the start. Their first eponymous album, released in June 1978, reached the top 5 of the British charts, thanks to songs with an everlasting impact, such as Sultans of Swing or Water of Love. During his time in the band, Knopfler established himself as a perfectionist and a meticulous musician in his production work, which was reflected in later years when the band released a series of critically and publicly acclaimed albums, including 1979's Communique, 1980's Making Movies, and 1985's Brothers in Arms. After the group disbanded in 1995, Knopfler went on to a successful solo career, exploring a more personal style that fused blues, rock, and folk. His long career has earned him numerous awards, including 3 Brit Awards and 5 Grammys. His legacy, both with Dire Straits and in his solo career, continues to be a source of inspiration for musicians and fans alike. We could classify Ritchie Blackmore as one of the most influential musicians in contemporary history. He is the father, along with other guitarists of the time, of what would later be called hard rock, and, above all, for his work in Rainbow, the driving force behind the emergence of rock with marked classicist influences, later called neoclassical metal or power metal in recent decades. According to Time Rock magazine, he is positioned as the best guitarist of all time, and his Highway Star solo is positioned at number 3 of the best guitar solos in history, according to the same magazine. From the technical point of view, he stands out for his manipulation of the pentatonic scale, blues scale and phrases, and classical modalities, as well as for evolving improvisation to the maximum in his concerts, becoming a reference in his most commercial stage of the 70s and in a procker of the neoclassical style in the 80s. Blackmore's genius became known in Great Britain from a very early age, especially for his speed. But it was not until he formed Deep Purple in the second half of the 60s when the road to glory would begin to open up for him. First, by bouncing off the psychedelic rock prevailing at the time with the group's first lineup, and then, when he hardened his sound, Deep Purple became one of the basic hard rock bands. In the 70s, the group released excellent albums, such as In Rockin' Machine Head, accompanied by concerts that were made memorable by Blackmore's improvisations and scenic games. In 1975, Ritchie Blackmore embarked on a new path, leading the band Rainbow, which included the great Ronnie James Dio on vocals. In this band, the guitarist had absolute freedom to make the music he wanted, and achieved great songs, sometimes grandiloquent, with lyrics of mythological aura, which were his trademark, without leaving aside the rock and roll. The days of this first stage of Rainbow ended when the members of the classic lineup of Deep Purple decided to reunite. That was quite an event, and it was not for less. The album with which they returned was a great work. Perfect Strangers, from 1984. After this brief spark, Ritchie Blackmore decides to take an absolute turn, away from hard rock to embrace Baroque and Renaissance music. He sets up the Blackmore's Night Project, with his wife, Candace Knight, plays in castles, dresses up as a medieval troubadour, and seems to find a definitive niche, as he continues to this day. It would be virtually impossible to understand the history of rock, and of the electric guitar of course, without the legendary figure of Jeff Beck, arguably the most innovative guitarist in history, without having such a flashy career. In the 60s, he played in several bands, and gained popularity on the local London scene as a session guitarist. However, the group that dominated blues rock in the middle of the decade was the Yardbirds, who, after the departure of their star guitarist, Eric Clapton, offered the position to Jimmy Page, who turned it down, but recommended his great friend, Jeff Beck, who would accept the offer. The guitarist managed to stay with the band for about 2 years, achieving global recognition. After his departure from the group due to tensions with the other members, he formed his own band, Jeff Beck Group, completed by Rod Stewart, Ronnie Wood, and Ainsley Dunbar. It was during this stage where Beck managed to position himself as one of the great rock interpreters of the world. But if there is a moment that marks the before and after in the career of the London musician, it is in 1975, the year in which Blow by Blow, produced by George Martin, was released. This album shows Beck's openness towards jazz rock and its fusion with elements of funk and soul. In the following decades, Jeff Beck maintained his high status as one of the best guitarists of all time, refining his fingering to the maximum, alternating the use of his fingers with fingernails or plastic plectrums, effects and pedal boards, distortions and other techniques to achieve liquid phrasing, powerful riffs, and electrifying solos, capable of making anyone's hair stand on end, always from his iconic Fender Stratocaster, Fender Telecaster, and Gibson Les Paul. Despite never having reached the commercial projection of his contemporaries, Beck had a great recognition, especially in the guitar community. He was ranked 5th on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 100 greatest guitarists in history, a publication in which he appeared 3 times on the cover and which mentioned him as one of the leading, most influential guitarists in the history of rock. Tony Iommi is the most important guitarist in the history of heavy metal, a guy who marked the way for a whole generation and laid the foundations of what would be the new way of doing hard rock in the 70s. The lord and master of the riff, Tony Iommi, forged a new genre with his Gibson, becoming the absolute reference for all those who came after him. As a young man, he had an accident with a press while working in a factory, losing the tip of his middle and ring fingers on his right hand. In order to continue with his career, he had to put a rubber prosthesis on his fingers and lower the tuning of his guitar, thus making the strings less tense to reduce the pain when playing. But the accident was not entirely detrimental to his musical career, quite the contrary, thanks to the fact that he lowered the tuning of his guitar, giving the C-sharp a new tonality, the hallmark of heavy metal. At the age of 21, Tony created Black Sabbath, the band that would make him world famous, whose first phase with singer Ozzy Osbourne lasted 10 years, the golden age of the group, in which they wrote some of the most famous albums of the genre, such as Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and Master of Reality, setting a high benchmark for anyone who wanted to imitate them.
Some people say my love cannot be true.
The band went through 1,000 battles with lineup changes and outbursts to adapt the sound to the direction the music scene was taking. In spite of this, Iommi is the only original member of the band who was part of all the studio albums. Tony has been around for almost 50 years of career. There have been several reunions of Black Sabbath with its original lineup. He has been considered the best guitarist in the history of heavy metal according to Guitar World magazine, and as the number 25 in history according to Rolling Stone. Eddie Van Halen was a legendary musician who forever changed the sound of rock music and guitar. He belongs to the legacy of the pioneers of rock and of the most globally recognized groups. The 8th best guitarist in history, according to Rolling Stone, he is also one of the most influential figures of the 80s and 90s, both in music and style. He was born in Amsterdam, but grew up in Pasadena, California, where he founded the band Van Halen with his older brother, drummer Alex Van Halen, and they quickly gained fame. With his characteristic solos, Eddie Van Halen propelled his Californian band and helped dethrone disco music from the charts in the late 1970s with the band's eponymous debut album, which already included such hits as Runnin' with the Devil or Eruption, in which Eddie shows the world his new tapping technique, using both hands on the guitar neck. The album was a huge success, selling over 10 million copies, and Eddie, at the age of 21, was already recognized as a great guitar virtuoso and innovator. Its sequel, Van Halen 2, was released only a year later, repeating the success. In 1982, Michael Jackson, admiring Eddie's mastery, asked him to collaborate on his song Beat It for the album Thriller. They spent practically the rest of the 80s releasing albums, almost every year, always receiving the best reviews, and being the hard rock band that most often presided the highest positions of the American magazine Billboard. Although some band members changed, the Van Halen brothers remained consistent with Eddie's acclaimed guitar work as the focal point of their legacy. Sadly, Eddie passed away on October 6, 2020 after a long battle with cancer at the age of 65. Eddie Van Halen's name, however, will remain not only in the hearts of those who knew him closely, but of all music lovers who thrilled to his songs. Eric Clapton is God. So says a popular graffiti that appeared in the streets of London at the end of the 60s, which serves as an indication of the popularity and enthusiasm that this extraordinary guitarist awakened in British society. Known in the musical world as Slowhand, He is considered an essential figure in the birth of English pop and one of its most defined aspects, rhythm and blues. He played in several groups, such as John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers, the Yardbirds, or Cream, with which he not only broke the mold, but also defined a new standard for rock bands. In 1972, after a period of detoxification from his heroin addiction, he definitively began his solo career and reappeared before the public in 1974. From that moment on, Clapton released several LPs, in which he always kept his style. Misfortune would appear in his life in 1991, when his son, Connor, 4 years old, died when he accidentally fell from the 53rd floor of an apartment in Manhattan, which plunged him into a deep emotional crisis. In the midst of grief, Clapton found an outlet for expression through music, composing Tears in Heaven, an intimate tribute to his son, a song that captures loss, love, and the hope of a reunion beyond this life.
'Cause I know I don't belong.
Despite his success, Clapton's legacy is also complex. His battles with addiction, his controversial comments in the past, and his personal struggles have occasionally cast a shadow over his career. However, Clapton has used these experiences to grow as a musician and human being, integrating them into his art and ultimately redefining what it means to be a vulnerable and authentic artist. Eric Clapton is not just a musician, he is a bridge between the past and the present, a figure who has transformed rock into an art form accessible to millions. His influence lives on in every guitar note that inspires new generations and in every song that touches the hearts of his listeners. David Gilmour is one of the most iconic and respected musicians of all time, recognized mainly for his role as guitarist and vocalist of one of the greatest rock bands of all time, Pink Floyd. His unique style of guitar playing, with melodic and emotional solos, has left a deep mark on modern music, which were a fundamental part of the success of legendary albums such as The Dark Side of the Moon, Animals, and The Wall. It is impossible to listen to one of his guitar solos without immediately thinking of his name, despite the fact that he usually improvises and recomposes on the fly during any of his live performances, the requinto he wants, among all the wonders he has created in the recording studio. After Roger Waters' departure from Pink Floyd in 1985, Gilmour was the main creative force of the band until his last years, creating albums such as A Momentary Lapse of Reason, followed in 1994 by The Division Bell, work for which Pink Floyd won its only Grammy Award. Since then, David Gilmour has continued his solo career, releasing several albums and participating in side projects. In 1996, the musician was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of Pink Floyd, and in August 2006, his solo on Comfortably Numb was voted by viewers of the radio station Planet Rock as the best guitar solo ever recorded. His particular style, together with the immense commercial and critical success of Pink Floyd, have turned David Gilmour into one of the most representative and influential guitarists of the musical panorama. Undoubtedly, one of the most influential, important, and versatile guitarists and composers of all time is Jimmy Page. Almost every rock guitarist of the late 60s and early 70s, even to this day, has been influenced by Page's work with Led Zeppelin and his riffs in the genesis of heavy metal. However, he refused to be pigeonholed into any one musical style, as he played folk, country, funk, blues, and other genres. In 1966, he was part of the supergroup The Yardbirds, and in 1968, he gave life to his greatest magic trick, Led Zeppelin. The influence of this band was so great that, to this day, its sound is heard in practically all rock bands. By reinventing the blues with electricity on their early albums, Zeppelin defined the sound of the music that would follow. Jimmy's Gibson Les Paul blew up every stage the band performed on, like a sword through a dragon's throat. As the years went by, the band's sound evolved record after record, with Jimmy as the main producer. In 1980, John Bonham died in Jimmy's mansion due to an ethyl intoxication, and this caused the dissolution of Led Zeppelin. Although the legendary band never reunited, except in special circumstances, Jimmy Page's career as a musician would continue, as he continued to participate in countless projects and collaborations, both in studio sessions and live. These collaborations have helped shape the music industry, and his legacy is one of the most iconic and influential guitarists of all time. Looking ahead, it is safe to say that Jimmy Page's work will continue to be an integral part of the music industry for many years to come. Genius, unique, or simply the best are some of the adjectives used to describe Jimi Hendrix, a guitarist who took blues, funk, and psychedelia to lay the foundations of a new musical era. A lover of effects, of his Fender Stratocaster, and of repeating over and over again until he reached a level of perfection only within the reach of the gods, Hendrix remains to this day one of the most influential figures for any guitarist or rock enthusiast. His presence, his magnet in front of spotlights and cameras, and also for having a biography that predicted what usually happens to many geniuses, that is, that everything happens in a flashing way, made him a star in life and a myth after it. Hendrix learned to play the guitar in a self-taught way, which meant that the way he positioned his fingers was not necessarily canonical, which, in turn, gave rise to many variations of sound. Another of his great hallmarks would be to take advantage of sounds that were traditionally considered undesirable, such as distortion and feedback. In his hands, the guitar would greatly expand the range of sounds of which it was capable, at a time when the variety of effects pedals, or analog amplifiers, and directly, there was no concept of digital sound. All this, moreover, did not remain only in the rehearsal room or the recording studio, but actively occurred live on stage, and before thousands of people, where Jimi Hendrix was the high priest of electric ceremonies in which he sang, marked with his movements the tone of the performance, and, in general, was the center of attention at each and every moment, not only during the solos. During his time, of course, there were already other exceptional guitarists like Eric Clapton, but none of them reached Jimi Hendrix's levels of innovation and audacity, a torrent of power and improvisation that, quite simply, many others were not capable of. With his untimely death at the age of 27, Jimi Hendrix had a career as brief as it was impressive. We can only imagine how far he could have gone in his eagerness to push the limits of the guitar, with a combination of creative maturity and technological advances. What we do know for sure is that his music has served for many to follow his example and dedicate themselves to go further with the six strings, and that, perhaps, should make Jimi Hendrix the best guitarist of all time.